What's up, Wildcatters? Welcome to another week of Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. Got a show that I like doing these shows where I just don't know anything about my guests. I don't say that disrespectfully. Just say I haven't talked to him.
Clean slate.
So, clean slate. But we got Greg from LongPath Tech, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
All right, LongPath Tech. So tell me real quick, what is LongPath?
Yeah, so LongPath, like the name is, we're the 5G of methane detection. So it's a system, sits in the middle of the oil field. It covers a 13,000 acre range. It's got a laser system that sweeps around. And we're looking for emissions. We're looking for emissions of H2S, of CO2, of methane, all of those things, quantifying from.
Did you say 13,000 acres?
Yeah, with one system.
That's crazy.
So that's kind of the, I know on your prior podcasts, you've had some of the other sensor types that come out and kind of do the box on the pad.
Yeah.
We do the box across the region. So think of it more like telecom meets methane detection.
I'm going to need to see some pictures of this thing. It sounds wild.
Yeah.
So, okay. Let's, this is obviously a big topic is methane, not only methane detection, but just being able to record and document methane is something that is very important and something that a lot of oil and gas companies are focusing on. How did you get into this?
Yeah, this was not the path I had planned on. So, this is the name LongPath, comes from these long laser beams that we shoot out over miles. But it's also this is a technology we were working on before we knew this was much of an issue.
Okay.
So I did my PhD at Stanford doing laser sensing.
Okay.
And I think, what they don't tell you about the PhD is by the end of the PhD, you're ready to be done with whatever it was you're doing.
I imagine so.
It's like a long horse race. And in the middle of the horse race, the horse dies and you get off the horse and you beat the horse for a while and then you realize it's not coming back. And so then you drag it over the line.
Got to drag it along.
So that was me and laser sensing. And so I finished there. And then I kind of did what every kid out in the Bay Area wants to do, right? Is start a company. And so I left laser sensing. I went in, we started a little company on sort of tabletop particle accelerators that you could use to make isotopes for medical imaging. And very interesting. Do not recommend. That's a technology that needs, decades more to be there. And so we did that for 3 years. I got the taste, and of sort of entrepreneurship and all that. And it was a rough go, those years. So I'm from Colorado. I went back to Colorado. And Colorado at the time, there was a technology there that had just won a Nobel Prize. It's called a frequency comb. It's a laser that kind of, your laser pointer emits like red light, blue light, green light, whatever. Yeah. This is a laser that emits hundreds of thousands of colors of light all at the same time.
And so it's called a frequency comb?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'd seen this technology for years because it won that Nobel Prize in Colorado. And at the time that I originally saw it, this was like big, optical tables in a laboratory and scientists sort of, leaning over and tweaking this and that and the other thing. But around that time, it had made the jump into like communications fiber, the same telecom fiber that takes our internet from point A to point B or whatever. It made the jump into that platform, so you could make the lasers inside of optical fibers and stuff. And so I thought, okay, this is like ready for prime time. And so I went to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that's NIST. Mm-hmm. Came back, didn't want to do anything entrepreneurial. I'd done that. I was licking my wounds, coming back, and walked into the laboratory, and it was a little bit like walking into an old garage, and there's like a dusty Ferrari in the corner, and you're like, oh, can I drive that? And the physicists that were all there were like, oh yeah, that old thing, give it a go,
Yeah.
And so it was a great time. I took this kind of technology that they were working on, and together with those physicists, we started kind of shooting it out the window of NIST and showing that we could measure like methane, CO2, all these different gases at just incredibly precise levels over long distances. So I went from there to University of Colorado as a professor, continued to work with the NIST folks, and I got the Department of Energy to kick in some money. And we basically said, let us take this table of stuff and make it into a little rack. and get it out into the oil field. Because that was probably like 2014 when there was like a lot of awareness coming up around emissions, and the U.S. we were booming in terms of production and unconventional production and that sort of thing.
Okay. I have a lot of questions for you, especially around laser tech. But first, let's continue on your journey. How did you figure out the application? I mean, you just say, let's go use this in the oil field, but how did that come
make
about?
that jump? So we had done these measurements. We sent it out the window, and we were showing we could measure like part per billion changes in methane. And that's like a, drop of water in the Olympic-sized swimming pool is what people say. And so around that time, Department of Energy was they put out a call, and they said, we want technologies that can monitor continuously around oil and gas operations for very low cost. And so we were thinking, all right, this technology, we can shoot it 3 miles, 4 miles, whatever it is. Let's take that. These operations are really dense, and let's take that system and spread that cost over all those different operations. Mm-hmm. So we put in an app. They gave us a couple $1 million to like get started. Yeah. So we built the team. The founding team is still the folks that are with us today. So the
Department of Energy puts out a proposal saying that, hey, we need technology that can monitor methane around oil and gas assets. Yep. You guys say, hey, we've been tinkering with this technology. We think that we can do it. You get a grant from DOE for a couple $1 million. What year? Was that?
That was 14.
That was 2014. Okay, cool.
And so this is long before, like, we'd go to these conferences, and have folks from Pioneer and everybody else, and they were like, oh, continuous monitoring. Like,
no one gave a shit about it.
What a fun problem you're working on, not so relevant right now. And, but, we got it out there, and we took this was a great moment for the team. We got this thing mobilized. So we shrunk it down into a tiny little cabinet that could like go out and work in Colorado extremes, not as extreme as some places, but we took it out to the field, and we took just a little tank of methane, and we walked it out a mile, and then we set it up and set it to leak. And then we turned on the laser, and basically the way we do is we sort of bracket we send a laser beam on one side and send a laser beam on the other side, and let the wind sort of blow across. And you can see this tiny little change in how much methane there's measured by one beam.
Interesting. So it's essentially you're measuring across a cross section, so you can see a change between 2 points of the beam.
Exactly. Like, we send a beam like the way we do it now. You send a beam on either side of a facility, like a multi-well pad or something.
Yeah.
And then as the wind blows across, you'll see more methane on one side than you see on the other, on the downwind side. Then you've got emissions on that pad. Okay. So we did this with like a little tank, and we started a leak that was probably about like a quarter of the breathing rate of a human, and turned it on, and could see this little change.
Oh, wow.
And we were all like, wow, that really worked? Because, when you write these proposals, you're like, oh yeah, we're just shrink this down, and we'll put it out in the field, and then, everything's going to work, and then it gets funded, and you go, shit, what did I do?
We got to go do it now.
Yeah. So anyway, we turned it on, and it worked. And so that was the beginning, really. So we thought, okay, this tech works. So then what ARPA-E did is they said, okay, you hit all these milestones, you shrunk it down, you made it robust, you showed that it can, get these whiffs of gas far away. It's got to have a commercial pathway. And so they said, we'll give you a little bit more, but you need to find a company that will commercialize this. Mm-hmm. And so we looked around, and we're like, okay, anybody out there building frequency combs? Anybody out there, in the oil field? Like, no, the answer is no. So we're back to like, hey, look, we got to do this ourselves. We got to start it ourselves.
So it's interesting that you brought up, 2014, no oil and gas companies cared about this. Fast forward to today, 2022, a lot of every company is looking at it and talking about it.
For sure.
And one, not just from a sustainability perspective, but also, you're losing money when your product is evaporating or being leaked into the air. So that's one thing that I think is so cool about methane detection and monitoring is that it's both a sustainability and economic play.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I tell people in climate this all the time, is that oil and gas companies are incentivized to reduce methane leaks
Yeah.
because it's literally their product going into the air. So
Yeah.
now a lot of companies are looking at it. And as you mentioned, we've had a bunch of technologies on the show that all utilize different ways of doing this, and continuous monitoring. Really, it hasn't been something that's been available, it seems
Yeah.
like, to oil and gas companies
Quite new.
until recently. Um, so I have a lot of questions on lasers.
Yeah.
Let me give you some context here because you'll
Yeah. Yeah.
appreciate
Good.
this.
Good.
So I started roughnecking and drilling wells back in 2010,
Okay.
right out of high school. And I get out there, and this is before shale, like right before shale had really kicked
Really
off.
go.
Pioneer Natural Resources didn't even have a horizontal program yet.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that shows you
Yeah.
kind of time frame.
How fast that's come on too.
And the rig I'm working on a rotary rig. We're throwing tongs. We don't have top drives. We don't have iron roughnecks. The rig I worked on looked like a rig from the 40s.
Yeah.
I see old pictures. I'm like, holy shit, it's the same
That's
exact.
it.
Yeah. And so sitting there all the time, drilling these wells, and I like to geek out and just think about better ways that we could do things.
Yep.
And I start thinking about drilling with lasers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right along the same time, School of Mines,
Yep.
I go to Google and I see that School of Mines right then had started standing up a program around drilling with lasers. And anyways, a couple of years ago, my cousin, he's a astrophysicist, and I said, hey, I'm really interested in the idea of drilling with lasers. And his response is like, man, he's like, lasers is some of the hardest. I mean, it's one of the hardest areas of science
Sure.
today. He's like, I don't know if we're there yet to drill lasers, but one of his professors has, like 20 something patents in laser tech. And anyways, I just find lasers to be really fascinating. And I don't know much about how they're actually used though. So, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners on this podcast are also in the same bucket as me as well. So let's talk about laser technology, the development, where are we at today with lasers? And then, you've already alluded to, how the technology works, but I'm still trying to wrap my mind around how does it
actually work?
Yeah. How does it actually work? So can you break this down for someone like myself that's not a scientist or a PhD in the scope of lasers?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a cool process. So there is, by the way, I think there is a company that is doing drilling with lasers.
Quays. Quays is, and there's been a few, and it's a rough game, but they're trying.
So there, what you have is this extremely high power laser. I mean, just tons and tons of power in the laser. The lasers we use, not nearly as powerful. Mm-hmm. Like, so if one of these goes into your eye, you won't even notice. You won't see it because it's in the infrared.
Yeah.
So, and that's the key to how this works. So what's cool about the frequency comb, I mentioned it shoots out, hundreds of thousands of colors of light. Well, it turns out a methane-like molecule, or a molecule like methane, you've got like a carbon, you've got some hydrogens, and that molecule sort of is always bouncing around, sort of jiggle, like the hydrogens are bouncing around compared to the carbon. So if you send in light that is the right amount of energy to make one of those vibrating methane molecules change to like a different vibrational state, it'll absorb the light. And it happens at very, very, very specific energies. That's the quantum part of this, right?
Yeah.
The molecules, and this gets even beyond my pay grade, they only exist at certain energies.
Yeah.
So you send in this light at just the right energy. And so like 1654.1 nanometers or whatever, that's the right energy. The methane will absorb it. And CO2 absorbs different wavelengths.
Yeah.
And water different wavelengths.
Yeah.
And they're all interspersed. So
it depends on the molecule.
Exactly. Yep. So we take this laser, it's got 100,000 colors, we shoot it out, and then we bounce it off something in the field. Right now, to keep things eye safe, we put little reflectors on the pads of the operators that we're going to measure. That bounces the light back. And when it gets back, if you look at those specific wavelengths where you should see methane absorption, you do see it. And then how much absorption of the laser you got tells you how much methane was there. and how much CO2.
So there's an
water.
actual calculation that you can see, okay, the laser absorbed this much, and that quantifies how much methane there is.
I shoot it out and 20% of my light comes back.
This is cool as shit, man.
I know how much there is. Yeah. But the trick, the hard part though, is actually, there's methane everywhere.
Yeah.
There's cows making methane. We're making methane, And so what you need, the trick is that you actually need to figure out how much methane is coming from the facility you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we do this thing where we sort of bracket the facility, and then we look at the methane flowing in, and then we look at the methane flowing out, and we look for a change.
Okay.
And that's what's been added by
because you have to be able to quantify that differential of what's actually coming in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So that's kind of the laser. It's funny. Everybody's like, "Oh man, that laser sounds really hard." I'd say the harder part was actually shooting the laser 3 miles and getting the light back, and then the other hard part was figuring out like, how do I make
fencing it and quantifying?
How do I get rid of the cow farts?
Yeah, because I gravitate towards the technology of the laser because that's the cool shit. But then the actual, and it's always funny. Anytime you build a solution or go to execute, you actually figure out what's the hard part.
Oh yeah.
And the hard part for you guys is actually being able to get it back and then quantify, hey, what's coming in, what's going out.
Yeah, telescopes and all this stuff.
Yeah.
That's been interesting. And learning like how can I get an oil and gas company, like how can we give them the data that's useful to them?
Yes.
That's huge.
Yes.
And I think that's, there's a lot of companies out, doing this type of stuff, not quite the same way LongPath does, but other ways of monitoring continuously. And I think it's a battle of it's not a battle. There's plenty of space for everybody, but like, who can give that data to the operator and make it useful for them?
Yeah. That's a big thing too, is that raw data is not useful to companies. And I think a lot of people are starting to figure this out. You have to be able to give data that's important to an operator and give context around that data.
Yeah.
Just raw data dumps don't help anyone.
Sure.
I mean, this is an industry that already is drowning in data.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't help them if you just pile on more data without context or useful data sets. And then another thing that it's interesting that you brought up is really kind of the gap between science and then commercialization of a product. That's because there's a big difference between having a solution that's driven by scientists, engineers, and then actually being able to take that and commercialize it and figure out, hey, where is the product market fit within these companies and how's it useful to them? So
that's what's taken years, and it's taken years for we were lucky. We were kind of working out all the details of how to make the tech work and get all get the price in the right spot and all that kind of stuff in time for people to start wanting continuous feedback. And that timing has just been
let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously we talked about 2014 era. You guys get the grants, you start developing the technology, but the industry wasn't necessarily needing it then. And then you fast forward 8 years to where we're at today. And obviously it's something that the industry is demanding. So let's talk about that 8-year gap.
What
between
happens?
then. What happens? I mean, you told me that that oh shit moment where you got to go figure out how to actually execute and commercialize the technology. Tell me, actually, let's pause real quick, because you said it's a small, cabinet.
Little cabinet.
So give me a mental image of what this actually looks like.
Yeah, it kind of, it looks like an electrical box or something. Okay. Smaller than a transformer, but same thing. Just it's this really unassuming little beige box.
It's kind of boring. I was hoping it's gonna be like a Tesla tower.
If you open it up, there's lights flashing and it makes beeps and does this kind of stuff. But yeah, I tell people, because you got this tower. Some people are calling us the Eye of Sauron. This all-seeing eye that looks around the field. Unfortunately, the all-seeing eye is in the infrared, so we can't see it.
So you can't even see it.
So what you see is this little telescope on top of a tower, and it's just kind of moving around in the circle, because it's surveying each of the facilities as it's going around.
How tall is this?
We use 50 feet in the Permian and the Anadarko, the DJ. Gets most, that lets us get out 2-3 miles.
50 feet, and then the monitoring. Does that happen across the entire 50 feet, or are there certain points?
So at the very top, there's a telescope. And that telescope It's on a gimbal that points it.
Okay.
And so we point it at a facility, and then we shoot the laser beam out, and then it bounces off this little reflectors that we place on either side of the facility.
Yeah.
It bounces back and actually goes right back into the same telescope.
Okay.
And then that's where we measure, like, okay, how much light is missing at this wavelength for methane?
Got you.
So then how much methane is there? So what's cool about it, and this is kind of getting back to the product market fit and like the economics, is it's super scalable. You've got one point that's covering 13,000 acres. So that's 1 point for power, 1 point for communications, which we all know is difficult out there in parts of the Permian.
Yeah.
And so all that processing and everything is done right there on the node, we call it. And then we've just got one cellular link that sends the data back on all those facilities.
Got you.
And so to give some scale, it's 1,000 of these to cover the entire Permian Basin. And, it sounds like a big number, but if we're talking about little point sensors at like 5 per pad or something.
Permian Basin's big when you're actually out
there.
Yeah.
So that's why we kind of say 5G of methane, right? It's like, there's just, it's like a cellular model.
Yeah.
And so it lets us have a really good sensor, this Nobel Prize winning crazy frequency comb thing, but low cost to the operators because they're subscribing up like a cell phone.
Yeah.
They're like, I want data on this pad. Okay. That'll be this much a month.
Cool.
And then they don't need to worry about what's in the box, so to speak.
I'll get back to my last question. I know I'm kind of bouncing around here,
well,
but
I'm helping us bounce around. So sorry about that.
The more you talk, the more questions I get. But we've talked about the hardware component of it. Is there a software component of it too? That's either visualizing the methane or tell us about that.
That's critical. Because and this is that 8 years. You'd asked about like what's that 8 years. This was okay. Now we've got this shrunk down laser system. It can sense stuff from far away. How do we make that useful to the operator? That's that 8 years. And also, like, I can tell you every different way we broke that thing. It's right down to like birds landing on telescopes and doing what birds do after they eat. And so the
something you never take into account.
No.
Bird activity. What are the birds?
I'm out there like wiping bird stuff off the telescope, and I'm thinking, I'm just a university professor. What the hell am I doing?
I love it. It's like you've mastered lasers and detecting methane, but some pigeon or dove is going to come run your planet.
Exactly. So we've had to come up with all these different solutions to stop that kind of stuff from happening, right? So it's autonomous. I forgot the software. So we built it into like successive, we started just with a dashboard, right? So you can see this like visual. Here's all my facilities. Green, red. Green means everything's good. Red means there's an issue on that facility that's causing an emission. You click on that, you then see the history of emissions on that facility. And that's pretty cool. Since we're quantitative, you can actually like see like, oh, this facility's been trending up. And we've had tons of people go out and say, oh, somebody's changed my VRU settings or something like that, right? And they switch that back, they can see it come back down. So there's that visualization. There's so many companies, there's so many dashboards that can be a little overwhelming to people.
Yeah.
So the other thing we've got is just like a REST API, and companies can go in with Spotfire or whatever and just grab the data and then put it next to everything else they got.
Yeah.
And then finally, we just released like an MQTT protocol where it'll just push the data to SCADA systems. And that's been pretty cool because if you put this, if you think about it, if something's going wrong out there, so much of what might go wrong leads back to an emission of some type. So it's like a check engine light, on your car, you're driving down the road, check engine light goes on, number of different things that could be wrong. But you need that early indicator to know you need to go in and get it checked, right?
Yeah.
So they put that next to like flare temp data, tank pressure data, all these other things. And you can pretty quickly start to say, oh, that's what's wrong.
Yeah. I think the ability to have real-time operational alerts to issues in facilities that's definitely a space that's growing and is important. And, to your point, there's definitely dashboard overload, right? Because now I have your dashboard and I have a dashboard for this company that we're using on another thing. And all of a sudden I got 10 dashboards that I'm trying to bounce in between. And, even we see that at Digital Wildcatters
Oh
between all
yeah.
the tools that we use. I'm like, fuck, I need a centralized operating system for Digital
That's
Wildcatters
right.
because I'm bouncing between all these dashboards. So
Yep.
yeah, that's really important to be able to have API access or
Yeah.
push it to SCADA, which is
Yep.
also
That's
interesting too.
it's been all customer driven. They
Yeah.
say, "Oh, this is great. I'd like to see it on my own system.
Yeah.
Can you do that?" We upgrade that,
Yeah.
and then all the rest of the customers love it too.
Yeah. So I'm imagining in that 8-year period was a lot of customer feedback loops,
Yep.
figuring out what people did want, didn't want. I'm sure that was also tough during that time period because, like we said, if
Yeah.
companies just didn't think that they needed it in the first place, it
Yep.
might have been hard to even get in the door to get feedback on what they would think
I
is
think it
important.
was, yeah, and this is where, like, so I come from outside the oil and gas industry, right?
Yeah.
I was, laser scientist or whatever,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of companies that are far more advanced that are thinking about this a lot harder than I think people give them credit for.
Hmm.
So we, for us, the first real commercial systems were going out in 2020. We did all these pre-commercial pilots. It's always a good idea. Go out, pick just a small number of people, put
Yeah.
the systems out, find out about the birds, find out about all these other things, right? And while people aren't paying you to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we had a kind of a grouping of companies that allowed us to come out and just try this,
Mhm.
and we didn't charge them for it. And then we figured out all the ways it broke, and they would give us feedback. Oh, it needs to be faster. We need more of this, more of that. That was great. In 2020, we thought, okay, we're ready to, put the LongPath hard hats on, slap the sticker on the side of the truck, and go down there and do a professional installation. So we started that in 2020, and first installation was in June 2020. That was 3 months into the pandemic. Oil prices were tanking. I mean, that might have been around that period where things went negative and everything.
Yeah.
These guys stuck with it. They were like, no, keep going. This is really interesting. We want you to keep
That's
going.
cool. Yeah.
And we worked together with them. They said, hey, we're experiencing cost pressure, and so we worked with them on pricing and all that kind of stuff. But no, these companies they've been plowing ahead.
Let's talk about.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. God, I hate how I'm just all over the place with my questions because one, let me ask you this question before I ask you my next question.
Sure.
And try to keep your answer short so you don't throw me off and give me 5 more questions
Sorry,
to ask you. No, usually I want long answers, but I'm so fascinated by this. My mind's going everywhere. You brought up a comment earlier about elements and elements being different between Colorado and Texas.
That's right.
What elements affect this technology? I'm sure just geographical landscape, hills, mountains are going to affect range.
Yeah.
Where you go out to the Permian Basin, it's flat as can be. You can probably go full range. But what other elements affect the technology?
Yeah. So what I tell people, if it's snowing or if it's raining, that's fine. Because what's interesting is, like, snow and rain, they also absorb the laser beam, but they absorb all the colors.
Okay.
Whereas methane absorbs these very specific colors
very
of
specific,
light, right?
okay.
So even though, like, the whole beam gets 20% knocked out by rain during rainstorm, you still see the dips at the certain wavelengths because of methane. So it'll run through that.
Okay.
We like wind because wind blows those plumes around. It gives us better quantification.
Yeah.
The only thing is if we get really dense fog or really heavy snow, so like during a really heavy snowfall in Colorado, that's a time, like, if you can't see a mile, the system probably won't be able to see that much further than you. So, but it's also a time when people aren't going to be running around trying to fix things, probably.
Yeah.
So
does temperature affect lasers at
the
all?
reading? Yeah. So the laser loves to be at a sort of at its own temperature.
Yeah.
So we got that little cabinet.
Okay.
That little cabinet's got some temperature control on it.
Okay.
But then when you shoot out the laser light, this whole thing about the methane molecules vibrating and they absorb the light, that happens at any temperature. It happens at any pressure.
Okay.
So the actual reading is unaffected by.
Got you. So it doesn't matter if you're up in the Bakken in North Dakota or down in the heat in Texas.
Okay. Furthest north we've been is Calgary, and that's rough territory up there.
It's pretty
flat,
north.
Windy. Yeah. There's not a lot of sun.
Yeah.
So it's and we handled that just fine.
Okay.
It's all, you just got to keep that laser, okay.
Yeah.
You got to keep it okay.
All right. About to do a hard shift on you right now because you talked about, I don't come from oil and gas.
Yeah.
You came from, you did your PhD at Stanford, came from out of the industry. What's it been like working in oil and gas? How has your mind, changed one way or another since working in the industry, coming out? Like you have any preconceived notions about oil and gas? I'm always interested.
I think it's been surprising to see the scale of it. I think your average American has not been through parts of West Texas and like even the Denver-Julesburg basin. It's kind of east of where everybody sees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the scale of the industry is unbelievable, and then I think I think seeing like the kind of American system of having all these different companies, interspersed with each other, and anyway, it's just been fascinating to learn. But honestly, like we have not. People have been really interested in the technology. People have been really kind of open-armed about it. We get the occasional. We kind of knew we made it as a company when we got our first few pieces of hate mail through the, submit your questions in the contact box. And people said, "Oh, take that liberal stuff back to Colorado," or, and we laughed and we're like, "All right, we made it."
Yeah. It's like positive signal.
Yeah. People are seeing and hearing about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to one of my friends who is also a PhD, and she's long time in the oil and gas industry, especially when it comes to robotics. And she's one of the smartest people I know. And she's telling me that she advises a startup, and they went and pitched a top tier VC. I won't say the VC's name, but everyone knows them. And she's like, Colin, they have no idea about offshore oil and gas. Like they had no idea that there's many cities out there. And she said that they keep calling her, like just very curious about this whole world of oil and gas and energy offshore, and that they just had no understanding. And it's you can't blame people outside of energy for not understanding because they've never, this is one of Digital Wildcatters' main objectives is to teach the world about energy and raise energy IQ. And just the scale of oil and gas alone, not just energy on a broader level, but oil and gas is massive, just an upstream. And then you go talk about midstream and downstream, and that it's hard to wrap, even for me, someone that spends I've spent every day in the industry, my adult life, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around how big it is.
And I think it's, the other thing I've learned is, and I don't know where I heard the term coined, but there's like city solutions and there's field solutions for things, and that was thought up in the city, and I think like that's where we've seen other technologies stumble, is they spend too much time up figuring out the city solution and not enough time going down and asking the guy that has to respond to the alert, hey, what'd you like about this? And what didn't you like about this?
I just recorded a podcast an hour ago with Tad Wallace, and Tad comes from the field just like me. He's all tatted up. He talks like a roughneck, like I talk. And we literally just went on a rant about this, that a lot of the technological solutions come from people at the field level, because just like, the bird issue, like you start figuring out what actually works. And, I didn't go to university, and used to get in a ton of arguments with petroleum engineers, like, that's just not going to work. Like, no, it works on paper. I'm like, nope, not going to work out in the field. I promise you. And so, you see that a lot with tech as well.
But that's where the opportunity is. And it's what's interesting about investing is kind of traditional, traditional Bay Area investor or something. They don't understand what's actually happening out here, and how much opportunity there is if you get it right.
You know why that's why this podcast exists.
And I appreciate this podcast. I too,
2018, like VCs did not know, hey, where can I go learn about oil and gas and tech? And there wasn't a place. So we started a podcast called Oil and Gas Startups. We're here today. So and one of my favorite comments I've ever got about this podcast was from a Stanford PhD. Nice. I don't know him. Saw it on LinkedIn. He tagged Digital Wildcatters. He said, I can't believe I just listened to an hour-long podcast about oil and gas, and I actually enjoyed it. And that was like one of my favorite, because I was like, okay, I can get someone at Stanford that was never interested in oil and gas prior, and
That's
so
the
they
right
listened
thing.
to it. Not only did they listen to it, they enjoyed it. Then we're doing good work
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
telling the stories.
No, it's
But
important work.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is one I'm going to be hitting you up sometime soon because
Should
I'm
come out
just
and see a system.
I want to come see the system.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a no brainer. That's one thing that sucks about this podcast is I have to sit here and use my imagination and so do
Yeah.
our listeners, but I actually want to come see this shit in
Yeah. Yeah.
action. And
That's one of the challenges with customers, is you kind of say, okay, I'm gonna have this system 3 miles away alarm you, when you've got a dump valve that's stuck, and they have to see it to believe it,
yeah,
so we're we do a lot of pilots, right, so that
yeah.
people, but as we've done more and more, then they talk to each other, right, and there's that guy's telling the truth.
The hardest thing about this industry is no one ever wants to be first, but
Yeah.
once you get some pilots going and people get comfortable with
Yeah.
it, then usually it starts domino effect.
I've heard that nobody wants to be, or everybody wants to be first to be second.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
we see that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it makes sense. This industry is used to a lot of drilling completion technology where something goes wrong, people die. And so there's pretty big ramifications, both from safety and economic risk, because look, I've trashed some $10 million well bores in my time. It happens when things don't go well. And so there's a lot to take into consideration when adopting new technology. I want to round this out with talking about y'all's model. You kind of alluded to this a minute ago about going off of a subscription model, almost like a cell phone. Dive into that a little bit and how you guys think about, these things change over time. But as of now, how do y'all think about the business model for oil and gas companies that want to use this?
Yep. So we do it. We think of it like a telecom build. So we put up the capital to put the system in, and then for the facilities that get monitored, in a 13,000 acre area, you might be looking at between 10 and 20 sort of high value, horizontal facilities, a number of other like conventional. So what we do is we kind of charge an installation fee just to get out there, put the reflectors on, and then we kind of charge a monthly fee like your cell phone, right? So and I've heard the other companies doing this, but it's like kind of true telecom model. You pay a certain fee, get data for that facility. What's neat about the LongPath system is we can the kind of point sensor approach, where you put a point sensor on every asset, that cost scales linearly.
Yeah.
So if I want to do 2 facilities, twice the cost, 3 facilities, 3 times the cost.
Yeah.
Nice thing about LongPath, the more facilities we cover, we can drive down cost. We can also decide how often we want to look at something.
Yeah.
So we could go out, we can hit high value facility over and over and over again, all through the day and night. But then maybe we want to ping like an old vertical like once a month or something like that. And we can do that.
Yeah.
And we can charge a tiny amount of money.
Yeah. So there's actually an element of economies of scale here
Exactly.
to where, the more assets that you actually have in that 13,000 acre range, it's going to be cheaper because you don't have a single point on each facility.
So like in the early days of cell phone, people would pay for a certain amount of data. That's kind of the idea here. What's been interesting with cell phone is you see like now everybody's, unlimited plan, right?
I've got a ton of Gen Zers on my team that don't know that it used to cost 10 cents to send a text.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You have to pay for like the minute.
Yeah.
So that's where we kind of see it going is you start off, kind of cleaning up the bigger facilities and like getting after those big leaks fast, which you hear people talking about. But then, we have the ability over time to kind of push down and give better and better data on all these facilities. We see it as people ramping into more and more data as they're ready for it. Right?
Yeah.
This isn't going to happen overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really fascinating way to think about the model. And as you get critical mass and build up the network, it becomes cheaper over time.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Where are you guys at in terms of the stage of the company? I mean, obviously you guys got DOE grants that carried you. Did y'all take any external capital outside of that?
Yes. Yeah. So we did. We had sort of Department of Energy and some other DARPA, others have funded this because there's other uses, right?
Yeah.
I've actually taken one of these systems out of the field to Dayton, Ohio. They've got ground test hypersonic engines there that the Air Force uses, and you can shoot the beams from the comb through a hypersonic engine, and you can see what's happening inside the engine.
Wow.
Because it's got methane in it too. It's got CO2, all the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we shoot it through. So actually, Air Force has a LongPath system, but so there's been a bunch of that kind of funding that came in.
Yeah.
That got us through, getting from R to D, right? From the research to the development. Then we started getting some customer revenue in 2020. That then triggered seed round. So we got through that. And then we're right in the middle of raising an A, getting close to that.
Cool.
So, and about, 36 people, I think, right now. So.
Awesome. Are you guys, I know you have some people based in Houston. Yep. Are y'all split between Denver and Houston, or is everyone everywhere?
Yep. So we've got most of the tech teams up in Denver, and then we've got, the team down here in Houston. And then we've got field crews in the Permian and now in the Denver Julesburg. And that's the other cool thing is I think we've learned more from those guys out in the field doing the installations and saying, if you did this.
Yeah, I think that's what's really cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Crusoe Energy up there in Denver. Really good friends with them. And one thing that's cool about them is that they've learned so much from they're so field hand centric, and there's something to be said for listening to people that are on the ground. Even, when you're good petroleum engineers, listen to their service hands and have knowledge osmosis from the people that are around them. So that's one thing that's really cool to me about tech companies in the oil and gas space is both blending science, technology, also with the field hand experience, and having that all in one company, one culture is pretty cool.
Yeah. And we can create good jobs down in these areas, So the first couple of folks hired out of Midland just recently. And so
it's very cool.
Yeah. So we're excited about that. And I think the kind of take home from this model of, you need 1,000 of these to cover the basin or something is one day I was in my car listening to, the latest news, and they were talking about how the last James Bond movie cost, X $100 million to make. To create this whole network is less than the cost of the last James Bond movie.
Yeah.
Right. So the tech is here. Like, we just need to do this.
Always blows my mind how much money they spend making movies.
True. That's true.
I just went and saw Top Gun a couple nights ago, and I'm like, what's the fucking budget on a movie like this?
Yeah. Well, and like, where's our priorities, right? They're like,
that's what I'm alluding to. Is like, how many problems could we solve in the world if we actually? But entertainment's where the money's at. So.
They are pretty good movies. But.
They are good movies too. I enjoy them. So. So if someone's listening and they want to check out LongPath, how do they get in contact with you guys? What's y'all's website?
Yeah. So www.longpathtech.com.
LongPathTech.com.
And Google it, and we're starting to get more presence out there. Since we were a bunch of tech founders and everything, we're getting there on like our social media presence and all this, but we spent so much time actually figuring out the bird problem. So now that we've got that, we're
figure out product, and then you can work on distribution and marketing. So
but we've got a presence there, so people can find us.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. This is extremely fascinating. And guys, if you're guys and gals, if you're listening and want to check out LongPath, we'll drop a link in the show notes. I'm sure sometime soon I'll be going out and getting this on video so we can actually see it, because I want to see it. So I'll make that happen sometime soon. Thanks again.
Sounds good. Thank you.